this actually has real implications for the players, because now one of the many threads that's come out of this is there is a risk that players who agreed to this mechanism could serve suspensions themselves. They could be banned from football for a while.
We knew that they were going to be punished in some way or other for their financial dealings. And here it is, 15-point deduction. How's that gone down in Italy?
Well, you say we knew they were going to be punished, Dotun, but I don't know if we did know they were going to be punished. We knew there was a chance. And I would go as far as to say nobody knew they were going to be punished like this, because even within the context of the sporting trial that just took place last week, which had the verdict passed down on Friday, the prosecutor, the Italian Football Federation's prosecutor who was bringing charges against them, asked for a 9-point deduction. So the final decision exceeded what was asked for, even by the prosecutor. And we're in this slight sort of mystery zone period right now, honestly, because the full verdict has to be published within 10 days of them releasing that judgment. And as of recording right now, it hasn't happened yet. We're recording, I suppose, 6 days after that verdict was passed. We've still got 4 more days to wait. And so even now, as I talk to you, there's still so much around this case that's sort of speculative, because, yes, we know things that the prosecutor argued. We know some of the evidence that was brought against Juventus. We know the outline of what they're said to have done wrong, which, of course, always going to be worth stating in this case. Juventus do deny all charges and say they haven't done anything wrong. But the actual full details of what they have been officially punished for, we don't know yet.
Do we know why they were brought into court in the first place? What's the background to this story?
Yeah, and this is where it gets wordy, so do feel free, guys, to interrupt me or to cut me off. So essentially, this all goes back to a case that in Italy has been referred to as the Plusvalenza case. Plusvalenza means capital gains, and it's all about clubs, not just Juventus in the first instance, who were charged on it, using creative financial mechanisms to inflate their accounts. And the most sort of core part of this is teams swapping players, doing exchange deals, and placing artificially high values, or at least what look like artificially high values on their players.
So I guess the most obvious one of those would be Artur Melo coming from Barcelona for 70 million euros, Miralem Pjanic going for 60 in the opposite direction. Very little money actually changing hands, but Juventus, for example, being able to have that 71, 72 million euros spread over like 5 years of Artur's contract, so it doesn't put too much on FFP, and yet being able to bank, in inverted commas, all the Pjanic money straight away.
Yeah, and I feel like this is an era in which we've expected football fans to become accountants and to understand this concept of amortization, which is what you just sort of hinted at there, Andy. When you sign a player now, and every football club does this is not unique to Juventus, this is completely common practice. In fact, it's now becoming a talking point again for Chelsea because of the Mudryk deal and FIFA saying, well, actually, maybe you can't do it over a contract that long. But it's standard practice too. If you sign a player for 70 million euros, as we say in this case, and their contract is 5 years, instead of putting on your accounts this year, we spent 70 million euros, you divide the 70 million by 5, and that's how much you put down for this year. And then you put the same amount next year and so on until the end of the contract. However, when you sell a player, you put that revenue on right away. So in the Melo Pjanic exchange is a good example. Juventus get to write in what they've made selling Pjanic right away, whereas the cost of Melo is spread over 5 years. So on this year's accounts, that's a profit. Even if it's a completely sort of no money changing hands deal, that's a profit on the accounts. So that mechanism is common and used everywhere. And in the initial Plusvalenza case, 11 clubs in Italy were charged and accused of essentially putting false values on players in these transfers. And in the initial case last year, the Italian Football Federation had a hearing, looked at it and said, sort of threw their arms up and said, okay, sure, but who can say how much a player is worth? Because football transfers are completely sort of beauty in the eye of the beholder. All the time you get players who cost a lot of money who don't work out. You can't put an objective value on a player. So they threw the case out. Then, separate to this, there's been an investigation in Turin called the Prisma investigation, which is the Turin public prosecutor, nothing to do with football, investigating Juventus accounts because effectively they've been accused of misleading the stock market. Not effectively, that is what they've been accused of, is misleading the stock
and
market.
that's a different jurisdiction now,
Which
because
is-
you're going beyond footballing
Right.
authorities. Yeah.
This is a criminal investigation. And misleading the stock market is, a big case that may draw in some of this this Plusvalenza stuff. The bigger element for them was actually about a wage deferral, which is Juventus sort of very publicly during the COVID pandemic said their players had agreed to give up 4 months' worth of wages because the club's financial situation needed it. And then the accusation against them, and this is a court case that will begin in March, is that actually the players did not give up that much wages because it was paid back to them in bonuses, which were guaranteed bonuses. So it was sort of said to them, look, you give up 4 months' wages, but either you get this loyalty bonus for staying or you get this golden handshake for leaving. And so you're getting this money back. Not all of it, but maybe 3 months worth of it.
Do you mind me just cutting to the chase? How much do they owe Cristiano Ronaldo?
Well, Cristiano Ronaldo is a fascinating sort of subplot in all this, because I'll get to it in just a second. I feel like I need to keep going with the Prisma bit first. So Prisma investigation by the Turin public prosecutor found all sorts of interesting things. They conducted wiretaps, they conducted interceptions of communications, and among their findings were various things that related to the capital gains case, the Plusvalenza case. But they also, in the wages case, have turned up all sorts of interesting documents, including this apparent side letter, which is sort of several players are accused of signing. I mean, this is all to go to an official court case, so I feel like I have to keep everything in the terms of allegedly.
Allegedly.
But there is apparently this side letter which a number of players have signed, which allegedly basically says, yes, we understand we're getting our money back, or at least some of it, not the full 4 months, but some of this money's coming back to us. But not all players signed it, and Ronaldo is among the players who didn't sign it. So is Kulusevski, by the way, apparently. And this actually has real implications for the players, because now one of the many threads that's come out of this is there is a risk that players who agreed to this mechanism could serve suspensions themselves. They could be banned from football for a while because you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to participate in this sort of, I suppose, what looks like almost like a charade of saying we're going to give up wages and not doing it. So Ronaldo's lawyers actually have sort of asked to see some of this documentation. They've said, this is interesting stuff. We'd like to see this because we didn't get this money back. And was everyone else getting this money back? So that's a whole separate side case going on. And I'm sure no one is going to cry for Ronaldo and his money. But that you named Ronaldo, and there's a whole separate story with Ronaldo, I suppose.
There's so many probables and possibles with this.
Yes.
And we'll try and avoid speculation as much as possible. But what does it do for Serie A at the moment where we are? Because clearly Napoli is streaking away at the top of the table. I think we might mention Napoli again in a minute. But Juventus were looking good, if not to push them on the back of the 5-1 defeat recently, certainly for a Champions League place, which would have been a minimum for them. Now, all of a sudden, they're catapulted into mid-table. I mean, there was this kind of air of defiance, wasn't there, in Turin around the game on Sunday. It was really entertaining 3-3 draw with Atalanta, and Ademola Lookman was brilliant again in that, wasn't he? 11 goals this season. But what is the feeling? Because Allegri has kind of changed his language, hasn't he? He said, well, nothing changes. We carry on. We're still going for Europe. I noticed he said Europe, not Champions League. Who immediately, assuming things stay like they are, and that's a big assumption for the moment, but we can only judge things on how they are right now, who benefits from this? Is it Roma? Is it Lazio?
Yeah, so just to sort of clarify that, I suppose 15 points have been given right now as a points penalty, which they are going to appeal. But for right now in the standings, it's dropped them all the way down into mid-table, and it's certainly thrown the Champions League race as it looks right now into something hugely fascinating, actually coupled with the fact that both Milan clubs suddenly seem to have lost their way, because both of them lost in the last, not even over the weekend because they spilled into this week, but in the last few days. And so, you have, I should have the table in front of me, I don't, but within a very small number of points, you have everyone from Milan and Inter down to Roma, Lazio, and now Atalanta as well. So the Champions League race has become extremely interesting. Max Allegri, the Juventus manager, is sort of famous in Italy for his points calculations. One of his tropes almost is he's always like, oh, well, you need this number of points. And he was saying, after the Atalanta game, well, 70 points will get you into the Champions League. So actually he did talk about the Champions League and we can still get there, but you have to go on this sort of run. And they have gone on runs before. And what was fascinating about the game against Atalanta, Andy, is, it was probably the most open attacking game of football that I've seen Juventus play all season.
Yeah.
Perhaps forced on them because that's how Atalanta play, and Atalanta have a way of turning games to their sorts of games. And because Atalanta scored first.
So did it not feel a product of the situation?
But that's what I was going to say is I almost felt like with their backs to the wall, we saw the best Juventus we've seen all season. Maybe they still had flaws because they conceded goals.
Yeah.
But they going forward, they were brilliant at times in this game. Di Maria, I think probably for the first time this season, it felt like he was really present because before the World Cup, he was injured a lot. But with hindsight, you definitely think how much was he also managing those injuries with a big eye on, I want to go to Qatar as best I can. But he was really sort of wonderful going forward. Arkadiusz Milik, who's having quietly a very good season for them, scores a superb volley. You've obviously got Federico Chiesa coming back from injury. He's already been playing, but there was this sort of really thrilling energy about watching them play. And even the last equaliser they got, where it's Di Maria feigning the free kick and then rolling it under his boot for Danilo.
And Danilo's been one of their stars of the season, hasn't he?
Yeah, and he does this daisy cutter under the wall. I thought all of their goals were just brilliant. And in the end, it still didn't get them 3 points because, as you said, Atalanta and Ademola Lookman have also been brilliant.
Well, as Andy said a moment ago, this whole court case and the deduction of the points is like lobbing a grenade. You didn't quite say it in those words, but you've lobbed a grenade into Serie A and there are consequences. This other question, though, is it going to get worse for Juve? Ask Sepu Saint on Instagram. And I had to say Juve because I couldn't pronounce Sepu Saint.
Is it going to get worse for them? I think this wage case is a big one. Of course, if they are found to have misled the stock market, that has sort of real world outside of football implications with criminal charges. Obviously, the whole board has changed, so individuals may already have left the club who get punished, but the club will certainly face further sporting penalties if that case is proven. There's been suggestions in the press of, it could be another 15-point penalty. And I think, honestly, that's where we're dipping a bit too far into conjecture because nobody expected this 15-point penalty. Who knows what penalty that could be, but there certainly would be sporting ramifications for them if that happens. It's also worth saying again, as I said at the beginning, they deny the charges. They're appealing them to the Italian Olympic Committee. The Italian Olympic Committee does not have the power to look at the merits of the case, but they do have the power to look at the process. And therefore, if the Italian Olympic Committee upholds their appeal, which
Italian Olympic Committee.
That's I know it sounds odd, but that's the standard sort of highest body of sort of sporting authority in Italy. They have a board of guarantors, and if they find that the Italian Football Federation didn't follow due process, and Juventus will argue, among other things, that this is double jeopardy. We've already been tried on this case. You can't try us twice. If they win that argument, that case, the 15-point penalty they have now could be vacated. So anything could happen in this case, honestly, but certainly Juventus have a lot more scary dates coming up in the calendar.
So without talking too much about the potential ripple effect, there is. If there are swap deals, and this could move across Europe, couldn't it? Because we're talking about transactions between two compliant clubs. That's what we're talking about. The thing that really interests me is one of the cases that was examined in the original proceedings that were shelved last April. And he's one of the most high-profile players in Serie A, playing for the league leaders, the top scorer, Victor Osimhen, who ended up going from Lille to Napoli for, 50+ million cash, plus some players of, if we're talking of Plusvalenza, I mean, this seems to be one of the clearest examples of it. David talked about it on the Ramble earlier in the week. Where are we at with this? Would the FIGC and their prosecutor like to look at this again?
Yeah, so the prosecutor, Giuseppe Chine, has actually, in the last few days, asked for information from the public prosecutor in Naples from, again, completely separate criminal proceeding, which was a fraud investigation into the Napoli president, Aurelio De Laurentiis.
Right.
So they've asked for evidence. If there's basically they've contacted the Naples prosecutor and said, is there anything that we should be looking at? And I think this cuts to a really sort of fascinating part of the Juventus case that we're all waiting on with this verdict. What is it that's specific in this Juventus finding that the Italian Football Federation have punished them for? We've all heard the arguments that they've these wiretaps sound damning. We've heard directors saying things about all the shit that's underneath in our finances, saying we've pushed this mechanism too far. We've heard things that sound damning, but what specifically has the Football Federation laid down as its basis for this judgment? Because a lot of the reporting around this case, certainly Gazzetta dello Sport, the morning after, was talking about, well, actually, you know what Juventus did wrong here was it's not they did something that no one else is doing, but they made it into a whole system. And that raises this sort of awkward question of, well, how do you lay that down in law? You know, to draw an extreme, slightly sort of ridiculous parallel, but I think maybe an illustrative one is it okay to kill one person as long as you don't kill 10 people? That's the question we're all asking. And this Osimhen case looks very questionable because 4 players went to Lille who are not players, but most never even played for Lille.
Well, we talked about it earlier, didn't we, off mic? And we could only think of one of them, couldn't we?
Yeah, and Carnes has played maybe once for Lille. He barely played. Older goalkeeper. So 20 million in value seems ridiculous. But then we're back to the very start of this conversation, the first charges that were brought in Italy in the Plusvalenza case. You can't set an objective value on a footballer. People will pay what they want. So on what basis were Juventus prosecuted successfully? And could that be a basis for someone else to be prosecuted? That's what we're waiting to find out.
We're hearing about all sorts of issues with regards to Chelsea now and the way that they offer contracts over a longer period so as to not pile all the sort of expense on one season. It does feel as if European football is going to feel the impact of what's going on in Italy.
I think it's such a fascinating big question of what could happen. I mean, I do think at the moment, with what we know so far, if there is one thing that Juventus are justified to feel in all of this, it's, I mean, any of these deals take 2 to tango. You cannot do this on your own. So, have other clubs been doing things that are similar? Yes. What could be sort of interpreted as precedent by other countries, by UEFA, by FIFA? Huge open questions with implications for lots of clubs all over Europe.
Yeah, I mean, look, I never want to assume what our listeners are thinking, but I know a lot of them will be thinking Barcelona at this very moment, because clearly they have had to be creative in allowing themselves the latitude to sign a lot of players in the last year and a bit since Xabi has become coach. Again, I don't think they're alone in that by any stretch of the imagination, but I think because football is such a pan-European community in the sense that we're talking about it, and you know, the biggest transfers in Europe are part of such a pan-European community. This doesn't exist in a bubble. I'm very interested to see the way it goes. And of course, clubs have felt they've had to be more creative because of financial fair play over the last little while. Now, the fact is, FFP has had a mini holiday because of COVID, but there's going to come that bit where UEFA are going to want to come back on it. Now, I think the really interesting question is, once we get to the other side of this Juventus verdict, once we've got reasons, once we've got precedent, once we've got their grounds for appeal and all that sort of stuff, do UEFA really want to stick the boot in on Juventus? Or do they think, well, Agnelli's not there anymore, maybe it doesn't matter to us to the same extent? Because remember, he was one of the, not just someone who was the architect of modern Juventus, but one of the would-be architects of the European Super League.